Welcome back to the channel, where we will dive deep into the cases that refuse to be forgotten, stories that haunt entire communities, puzzle investigators, and redefine justice itself. Today, we're opening 4 extraordinary case files, each one a haunting tale of a young life cut short and the unyielding quest for truth that followed. First, we revisit the tragic case of Julie Buskin, December 1996, Oklahoma City. A 21-year-old gifted dancer vanishes before sunrise, leaving behind a trail of eerie clues, a missing car, and unanswered calls. When her body is discovered by Lake Stanley Draper, DNA evidence holds the secret, waiting almost a decade for the break that would expose her killer. Then, the murder of Laura Salmon, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, 1984. An 18-year-old college student disappears after work. Her body, hidden beneath clothes in a field, sparks a mother's decades-long battle for justice. Only advances in DNA, years later, unmask the man who vowed no one else could have her. We also revisit Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, whose tragic murders in the 1980s England birthed a revolutionary tool, DNA fingerprinting, that cleared the innocent and forever changed criminal investigation. Join us as we follow every twist, every dead end, and every breakthrough, because in cold cases, every clue matters. Case file number 1. The tragic case of Julie Buskin, December 1996, Oklahoma City. 21-year-old Julie Buskin was a bright, talented young woman whose future seemed limitless. Born and raised in Benton, Arkansas, Julie had followed her passion for dance all the way to the University of Oklahoma. She was a dedicated student, majoring in dance, with dreams of one day opening her own studio to teach children the art she loved so deeply. Friends described her as talented, popular, and full of life. At the time, Julie worked at the university golf course. Her days were busy, but she still made time for the people closest to her. On the evening of December 19, 1996, Julie spent time with Ryan James, a co-worker and friend, at his grandparents' home. They had dinner, watched a movie, and made plans to meet the next day for lunch. Around 10 p.m., Julie said goodbye and headed out to meet other friends for a small Christmas gathering. That night, Julie laughed, played Monopoly, and exchanged gifts with her group. She was scheduled to move back home the next day for the holidays. Her semester had just ended, and her roommate Megan was also there. Julie had promised Megan she'd drive her to Will Rogers Airport early the next morning. Determined to pull an all-nighter, Julie and Megan left the friend's house around 2 a.m. and grabbed a late meal at a restaurant called The Kettle. Afterward, they stopped at a gas station for fuel and cappuccinos before heading back to their apartment shortly after 3 a.m. to pick up Megan's luggage. By 4:30 a.m., they were en route to the airport. Megan made her flight, and at approximately 5:30 a.m., she watched Julie drive away in her red Eagle Summit, presumably heading back to her Dublin West apartment. Then something terrible happened. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, several residents of Julie's apartment complex were startled awake by the sound of a woman's blood-curdling scream. One resident, alarmed and shaken, called 911 and said, "We were just sleeping, and my wife heard a really strange, really awful scream from the parking lot of our apartment complex. Do you see anything outside?" "No. I'm kind of afraid to go outside, actually. It would be the last known sign of Julie Buskin alive." Later that day, Ryan James arrived for his lunch date with Julie, only to find her apartment empty. Julie was nowhere to be found. Her Red Eagle Summit was missing as well. Concerned, Ryan reported her missing. Not long after, Julie's parents, who had driven from Arkansas to help her move home, arrived. Instead of a joyful reunion, they were met with devastating news. Their daughter had vanished. Approximately 12 hours later, a jogger stumbled upon a horrifying scene. Julie's body was found on the bank of Lake Stanley Draper, about 15 miles from her apartment. Her hands were bound behind her back with shoelaces, and from the waist up, she was submerged in water. She had been executed, shot once in the back of the head with a .22 caliber bullet, fired at point-blank range. There were chilling signs she had been assaulted, and investigators discovered 2 sets of footprints leading to the water's edge, Julie's and those of her killer. Only one set returned. Nearby, police recovered a pink leotard marked with the initials JB. It belonged to Julie. Male DNA was found on it, carefully preserved for future testing. The investigation begins. Detectives launched an exhaustive investigation, interviewing Julie's many friends, classmates, and acquaintances. No enemies, no suspicious exes, no one with a clear motive. Her apartment showed no signs of a struggle. Julie's car was later found abandoned at another apartment complex, just 1 block from her own. Inside, investigators found red sand, eerily similar to the soil near the lake where Julie's body had been discovered. Curiously, no foreign hairs, fibers, or fingerprints were present. Even her cell phone was missing, but records revealed 2 strange calls made after her death, one to a weather forecast line and another to a disconnected number. Despite a $70,000 reward, leads quickly dried up. A month later, a witness came forward. On the night of Julie's abduction, he had nearly collided with a car matching hers near the lake. Suspicious, he followed the vehicle for several miles, catching a glimpse of the driver, a muscular young man, possibly Hispanic, with long black hair who kept nervously checking the rearview mirror. A composite sketch was created and broadcast repeatedly. No one recognized the suspect. The case went cold for 4 long years. In 2001, police received a tip from a female inmate who suspected an acquaintance, Dennis might have been responsible. Dennis lived just blocks from Julie's apartment and resembled the composite sketch. But his DNA, when tested, came close, very close, yet did not match. Investigators turned to his only living male relative, his brother. Again, no match, another dead end. Julie's devastated parents were forced to face the possibility that justice might never come. Years passed. Then, in 2004, a breakthrough. A man named Anthony Castillo Sanchez was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend. As part of his arrest, Sanchez was required to provide a DNA sample. When compared to the male DNA found on Julie's leotard, the results were unmistakable. A perfect match. At the time of Julie's murder, Sanchez had been just 18 years old. He lived a mile from her apartment. His girlfriend's diary from December 1996 mentioned Sanchez buying matching Nike running shoes for them, the same size and model as the footprint found at the lake. Investigators also learned Sanchez and his father, Glenn, had a bizarre hobby, firing .22 caliber weapons into the walls of their rental home. Ballistics confirmed the bullet used to execute Julie came from one of those guns. Even stranger, one of Sanchez's ex-girlfriends had a phone number just 1 digit off the mysterious call made from Julie's missing phone. Detectives theorized Sanchez had tried to dial her number from memory and misdialed. Justice, delayed but not denied. In 2006, Anthony Castillo Sanchez was convicted of Julie Buskin's murder and sentenced to death. He maintained his innocence for years, later claiming his father was the real killer. However, DNA analysis ruled Glenn Sanchez out definitively, with odds of a mistake as low as 1 in 200 quadrillion. Anthony Sanchez's appeals continued for nearly 2 decades. As of March 2023, he was still challenging his conviction. Julie's parents, who had endured unimaginable loss, finally faced the prospect of closure. Sanchez's execution was scheduled for September 21st, 2023. Julie Buskin was a gifted dancer whose life was just beginning. She was on the cusp of realizing her dreams, surrounded by friends, family, and a bright future. Instead, she became the victim of a senseless act of violence. Justice came slowly, painfully, but it came. And her memory lives on, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the relentless pursuit of truth. Case file number 2. Murfreesboro, Tennessee is a place in the United States that saw a very famous battle took place during the Civil War, the Battle of Stones River. In recent years, Murfreesboro has enjoyed substantial growth with many people flocking there, thanks to the university. In 1984, a crime took place involving a university student that's still talked about today in Murfreesboro. On May 31, 1984, a farmer in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, made a startling discovery. On his way home, the farmer saw some clothing lying in the field and decided to approach. When he did, he noticed the body of a girl was under the clothing. She was only wearing a bra and was covered with 2 pairs of jeans and a dark jacket. The sleeve of the jacket was wrapped around her neck. Investigators determined the first pair of jeans were hers, and the second pair were men's jeans. There were also a pair of underwear found clutched in one of her hands. She was identified as 18-year-old Laura Salmon. Laura was born on October 6, 1965 in Tennessee. At the time, Laura was a local college student. She attended Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And furthermore, she also worked as a cashier at Kroger grocery store. The autopsy concluded that Laura lost her life due to blunt force trauma to the head. The weapon appeared to be the rocks found near her body. The blood on those rocks and other material were consistent with her being struck up to 10 times in the head. Also, during the autopsy, the medical examiner found that Laura had been intimate with someone within the last 24 hours or 48 hours prior to her life being taken. There were no injuries or any evidence found that showed it was not consensual naturally. One of the biggest leads for investigators was the pair of men's jeans found on top of Laura's body. Investigators found male DNA on the jeans from a different individual than the male that was intimate with Laura. This DNA likely belonged to the perpetrator. Unfortunately, DNA testing was still in its infancy, and there was not much else investigators could do with the DNA other than store. Investigators then focused on creating a timeline of events, hoping that it would help them solve the case. Laura started her day by going to her job at the Kroger grocery store. The records showed that she left the store around 1 p.m. After that, she was supposed to go to an appointment at the Middle Tennessee State University to check her grades and meet with some of the office personnel. She also had plans to go swimming at her grandmother's house, but never made it there, or the university investigators found Laura's car near the store miles away from where her body was found. Investigators were unable to find any fingerprints in the car that did not belong to Laura, but interestingly, they did find a foreign hair. It was stored alongside the DNA evidence they collected from the pair of jeans. Equally important, investigators found dirt in the wheel wells. The FBI lab determined that they were consistent and that there was a high probability that Laura's car had been on the road right next to the crime scene. This meant that someone took Laura's life and then drove her car back to her place of work. Other than making the investigators believe the perpetrator knew Laura, the lead was not fruitful. Witnesses came forward and placed Laura at a local nightclub on the night before her life was taken. The witnesses said Laura was dancing with an unidentified young man, but investigators could not locate him. Laura's body was found in an area that often served as a lover's lane for high school and college students. They went there to party, have bonfires, etc. The theory then became that Laura met a guy at the nightclub after she finished work, and they went to Lover's Lane there. Laura denied the unknown guy's advances, and he took her life. Since investigators could not identify the young man, they talked to Laura's high school boyfriend, David Kyle Gilly. He was known to be the jealous type, but he had an alibi. His stepfather told the police that David was home all day when Laura's life was taken, so he could not be responsible. Thus, he was ruled out as a suspect. Just when investigators ran out of leads to follow, a woman in Nashville, Tennessee called the police with a possible lead. She claimed that she had been assaulted by a man named John Taylor during the ordeal. Taylor apparently told her that he would do the same thing to her that he did to Laura. When questioned by the police, Taylor denied assaulting the woman and denied talking about Laura or having anything to do with her. A background check discovered that Taylor attended the same university as Laura. He was even a member of the same health club, Olympus Athletic Club and Spa. Taylor also attended the same fraternity gatherings and functions as Laura. Even more relevant, Taylor was near the university on the day that Laura's life was taken. Taylor had a history of being violent toward his girlfriends or his female companions. All this added to his possibility of being a suspect. Investigators then had FBI analysts compare Taylor's hair to the foreign hair they found inside of Laura's car. They received a report back from the FBI that the hair recovered from the vehicle was consistent with John Taylor's hair. Case closed, right? Another asshat caught, but not quite. At the time, mitochondrial DNA testing of human hair was still quite a few years away. The hair could have belonged to about 20% of the population. This was, of course, not concrete enough to arrest Taylor. Even though it seemed like a done deal, there would be a few more twists in this case. Investigators found nothing to link him to the crime scene or to confirm that he was with Laura on that day. The men's pair of jeans found at the crime scene had an inseam of 36 inches, and the waist was 30 inches. Taylor was a small fellow, and the jeans would not have fit him. Investigators had no choice but to move on to other suspects. Over the years, they looked into over 100 suspects, but nothing came of it. Laura's mother, Reen Mackey, made a promise to Laura at her grave. She promised Laura that she would see that justice was done. Reen didn't really know how she would fulfill that promise, but she decided it was the last thing she could do for Laura. Many long years would pass before help finally came. Dan Goodwin was one of Laura's friends at the university. He went out with her a few nights before her life was ended. Dan asked her if she wanted to go see a movie, and they wound up at the cinema on May 27, 1984, where they saw a matinee show of The Natural with Robert Redd. At Laura's funeral, Dan promised her mother that he would help find the perpetrator. After graduation, Dan became a newspaper reporter at the Daily News Journal in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. There, he became the police reporter. He wrote about a series of unsolved cases in 1987, which included Laura's case. Dan knew that he was more interested in the actual police work than simply just writing about it. Several years later, Dan left journalism and became a police officer. The very first cold case he was assigned was Laura Salmon's. One of the first things Dan did was send all of the evidence back to the forensic lab for testing. DNA technology had greatly advanced, and completely new testing took place. While that was ongoing, Dan followed other leads, one of which came from a high school student. In 2000, a student at Oakland High School was talking about the Laura Salmon case. The student told everyone that his father took the life of a girl in 1984 and thrown her body away. The student's father was David Patterson. He had a police record for aggravated assault. Unfortunately, when Dan wanted to try to speak to Patterson, he learned that Patterson was not alive anymore. He had been fatally shot. Dan, of course, still decided to continue following the lead. They obtained DNA from Patterson's children. The DNA was compared to the male DNA found at the crime scene. It was not a match, and he was ruled out as a suspect. Dan then went back to John Taylor, who was initially a suspect in the case. His DNA also did not match. In case you were wondering, Dan also provided a DNA sample. After it was tested, it confirmed that Dan was not responsible. Dan then turned his attention to one man who went under the radar. In the initial investigation, the name that caught his eye was David Gilley, as earlier mentioned. David was Laura's high school boyfriend, a year younger than her. He was initially ruled out because of the alibi he was given by his stepfather. Dan, however, found that a witness came forward that directly contradicted that alibi. The witness saw David Gilley driving Laura's car on the day that her body was found. She spotted him not far from the road that led to the area where Laura was found. According to the witness, David had a blank expression on his face and was just staring straight ahead. She was able to identify him through a photo lineup as well as Laura's car. Dan also saw David's propensity of violence towards women in his life. This included Laura Salmon. Sometimes he would get mad at her, grab her by the head, banging her head into cars, school lockers, or whatever was nearby. He even sometimes punched her. On one occasion, he broke out 2 of her front teeth. Dan could not believe David Gilley was so quickly ruled out during the initial investigation. David was approximately 6 foot 2 inches tall, and the men's jeans that were found at the crime scene would have fit him perfectly. Dan then got Jerry Finley's help on the case. He is a crime scene reconstructionist. Jerry found tiny drops of blood in the jeans. It was medium velocity impact spatter. This sort of spatter usually gets produced when someone is hit with a blunt object such as a rock. The majority of the blood stains were just above the knee. This indicated that the perpetrator was kneeling on the ground as he was hitting Laura with the rocks. All of this evidence just confirms to investigators that the men's pair of jeans belonged to the person who took Laura's life. It was already believed, but DNA testing confirmed that the blood on the jeans belonged to Laura. Dan then tracked David Gilley down in Florida. By then, Gilley was twice divorced, and he was working for the Manatee County Public Works Department. Unsurprisingly, he had a police record. Gilley had arrests for battery, attempted burglary, and resisting arrest. When Dan questioned Gilley, he once again denied any involvement and said that he is not responsible for what happened to Laura. In a strange twist, Gilley did admit that the jeans were probably his. When investigators told him that they believed the owner of the jeans as the perpetrator, he quickly requested an attorney. Investigators then obtained a saliva sample from David Gilley. On May 31, 2000, DNA testing proved that Gilley was the donor of the DNA found at the crime scene, and thus responsible for taking Laura's life. On the 16th anniversary of the crime, David Gilley was finally arrested. Dan, the man, kept his promise to help Laura's mother in solving the case, and Laura's mother kept her promise to Laura that she would see justice takes place. The motive was believed to be jealousy. If Gilley could not have Laura, he believed no one else could either. When she went off to college and he was still in high school, she made new friends, and he didn't like that he would often stalk her. Laura's mother tried to convince Laura to get a restraining order against Gilley, but she was too afraid. Investigators believe that Gilley somehow coaxed Laura out to the deserted lover's lane, where he struck her in the head repeatedly with rocks after seeing that there was blood on his jeans. Jilly took them off and left them at the crime scene. He then drove Laura's car to her workplace, where it would later be found in September of 2006. David Gilley went on trial. The defense claimed the presence of another man's DNA was proof that someone else was at the crime scene. The jury never believed any other DNA at the crime scene belonged to the real perpetrator. Gilley was found guilty of all the charges against him, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Case file number 3. Narborough is an extremely safe village in Leicestershire, England. It is known for one crime and one crime only. It took place in 1983. 15-year-old Linda Mann lived in Marlborough. She attended Lutterworth Grammar School and Community College. She was the younger sister of Susan Mann, who was 2 years her senior. Their mother was Kathleen Mann, who moved to Narborough after her marriage ended. Kathleen married Edward Eastwood in 1980 when Susan was 14 and Linda was 12. Linda was described as a typical teenager. She was quiet but popular. She liked school and enjoyed being with friends. Linda had little trouble with adolescence, an adventurous girl. She liked everything about growing up: music, hairstyles, makeup, and clothes. If money for clothes was a bit short, Linda would babysit to earn money and make her own dresses. On November 21, 1983, Linda walked to a friend's house but never made it there. She promised Kathleen and Edward that she would be home by 10 p.m. by midnight. Linda was still not home. Her frantic parents called the police. They searched all night for her. A hospital porter discovered her body at 7:20 a.m. as he was on his way to work. He initially thought it was a mannequin. Linda had been assaulted and strangled. Her jeans were removed and the rest of her clothes were strewn about. She had a scarf around her neck. The scarf was used to strangle her. When people in Marlborough heard about the crime, they were absolutely horrified. Young girls were encouraged to walk in groups. From then on, investigators searched the immediate area around the crime scene, but were not able to find anything useful only a few hundred yards away from the crime scene. There was a local psychiatric hospital. Some people believed that the perpetrator could be a patient at the hospital, but no evidence of this was found during the autopsy. Male DNA was collected from Linda's body. The individual had type A blood. This meant about 10% of the adult male population in England could be responsible. Edward's blood was taken, and it was found he was not the same 10% blood group as the slayer of Linda. A group of investigators walked from house to house to see if they could gather any information. Other investigators made a list of all offenders of similar crimes in Leicestershire and went about questioning them all. Investigators received a call about a spiky-haired youth. The person on the phone claimed to have seen him at about 8 p.m., about 2 minutes away from where Linda's body was found. Unfortunately, he was never identified. For 3 long years, investigators tried to find the perpetrator. It was then, in 1986, that tragedy struck again. Case file number 4. 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth was the kind of girl who lit up every room she walked into. Living in Enderby, Leicestershire, with her parents and brother Andrew, Dawn had a passion for drawing and a natural gift for capturing the world on paper. She balanced her school life with a part-time job at the local newsagent, a typical teenager with big dreams. On July 31, 1986, Dawn finished her shift at 4 p.m. and headed to a friend's house in Marlborough. Her parents expected her back by 7 p.m., but by 7:30, with no sign of her, concern turned to dread. They scoured Marlborough, retracing every path Dawn might have taken, but she was nowhere to be found. By 9:40 p.m., they made the call no parent ever wants to make, alerting the police. Whispers of fear spread quickly. People couldn't help but think back to Linda Mann, another teenage girl who had been taken under chillingly similar circumstances just 3 years earlier. A few days later, the Ashworths' worst fears were confirmed. Dawn's body was found in a secluded field off 10-Pound Lane. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Forensic evidence pulled from the scene revealed something haunting. The DNA matched the attacker who had taken Linda Mann's life. 2 teenage girls, both snatched from footpaths, both walking alone, both victims of the same predator. The connection deepened. Linda and Dawn had even attended the same school, Lutterworth Grammar School and Community College, right at the foot of 10-Pound Lane. Police set up a mobile incident room to collect information. Over 200 calls came in, and dozens of locals showed up with tips. One lead stood out. Several witnesses reported seeing a young man on a red motorcycle wearing a red crash helmet near the area around 5 p.m. on the day of Dawn's disappearance. Then came an odd twist. A 17-year-old kitchen porter from Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital, not far from where both victims were found, told a constable he had seen Dawn that day. But before police could re-interview him, an alarming story reached the incident room. The kitchen porter's friend recalled a late-night conversation on July 31st, just hours after Dawn went missing, where the porter had described, in eerie detail, where Dawn's body would be found, in a hedge near a gate by the M1 bridge. This was more than 12 hours before police even discovered the body. When pressed on how he knew, he said cryptically, "Someone told me." The information was too precise to ignore. Investigators arrested the kitchen porter, Richard Buckland. At first, Buckland denied involvement, but under questioning, he gave wildly inconsistent statements and, in one interview, offered a chillingly accurate confession, only to retract it moments later. In a later session, he described crime scene details that had never been made public. It seemed open and shut. Meanwhile, Dawn was laid to rest 4 weeks after her disappearance in the quiet cemetery behind St. John the Baptist Church in Enderby. Over 200 mourners came to say goodbye to a girl remembered as bright, lively, charming, and full of life. But as investigators built their case, a revolutionary new technology emerged: DNA fingerprinting. Developed by geneticist Dr. Alec Jeffreys at Leicester University, it had never been used to solve a criminal case. When tests were run on DNA from both crime scenes, the results stunned everyone. Richard Buckland was innocent. Not only had Buckland not harmed Dawn, but he had also not taken Linda Mann's life. Yet the DNA confirmed one chilling fact: the same man had killed them both. Buckland became the first person in history to be exonerated through DNA profiling. Investigators were back to square one, now led by Inspector Derek Pierce. They launched a mass DNA screening, asking every male between 17 and 34 in the surrounding villages to voluntarily give blood and saliva samples. By May 1987, over 3,500 men had been tested, yet the killer remained hidden. Then, in September, a breakthrough came via an anonymous phone call. A woman reported overhearing a man named Ian Kelly bragging in a Leicester pub that he had taken the DNA test on behalf of his friend, Colin Pitchfork. Pitchfork, a baker with a history of flashing, had long been on police radar but was previously ruled out because he had supposedly moved to the area after Linda's murder. Now, it all unraveled. When confronted, Ian Kelly admitted Pitchfork had manipulated him, convincing him to take the test to avoid suspicion. Investigators went straight to Pitchfork's home. Detective Mick Thomas arrested him, stating plainly, "We believe you are responsible for the murder of Dawn Ashworth on July 31st, 1986. Another man gave a blood sample for you." Pitchfork didn't deny it. His silence spoke volumes. His wife Carol, upon hearing the news, lashed out, kicking and punching her husband in a fury the officers didn't rush to stop. Under interrogation, Pitchfork confessed to both killings. He admitted he initially only planned to flash the girls, but killed them when he realized they might recognize him. After each murder, he returned home to his unsuspecting family, his own baby waiting in the car. Pitchfork even revealed he had contemplated killing Ian Kelly to keep him quiet, but never followed through. In January 1988, Colin Pitchfork pled guilty to both murders. He was sentenced to 2 life terms, but the lack of a minimum sentence outraged the victims' families. Linda Mann's mother, Kathleen, said through tears, "He must never be allowed to walk the streets again. There's no excuse anymore." This case marked a turning point in criminal justice. For the first time, DNA fingerprinting not only caught a killer, but also cleared an innocent man. Today, thousands of cold cases have been solved, thanks to the breakthrough pioneered by Dr. Alec Jeffries. And it all began with the tragic cases of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. That concludes today's video. I truly hope this gave you valuable insight into some of the most overlooked cases throughout the years. If you found this helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications to stay updated. If you're not sure what to comment, just drop a 555. It lets me know you watched till the end. Thanks again for your time and support. There's more on the way, so stay tuned.